"I need a husband by dawn," she said, and put both hands flat on the taproom table, as though the words might tip over if she let go of them. The man across from her had been turning a cup of ale he had not touched, and he went still. Rain had not driven her here. There was no rain, only the thick, warm dark of a July night, and the dust of 40 miles still grey on the hem of her travelling silk. She had walked into the Crossed Keys at 11:30, asked the innkeeper one question, received one answer, and crossed the whole low-beamed room to the only table where a stranger sat alone. Because the stranger was the last column left in a sum that would not come right any other way. And what would the husband be required to do, exactly? He asked. Not laugh. Not call for the innkeeper. Not look at her the way the curate's wife at the assembly had looked at her 3 days ago, when the news of Mr. Bell and his heiress had gone round the card tables like a dropped tray. The stranger only asked his question, quietly, as if she had proposed a hand of piquet, and he wished to know the stakes before he agreed to sit. "Sign his name in a register," Rosalind Vane said. "Once, before the sun comes up. After that, he may go to the devil with my blessing, and £100 in his pocket, and I will never trouble him again." He set the cup down. He had a broad pair of shoulders that strained the seams of a plain brown coat no gentleman's valet had ever pressed, and large hands, and a scar across one knuckle, white and old. He looked, in short, exactly like what the inn-yard would have called him. A man riding through on no business of anyone's. That was the whole of what she required. A name, a body in a coat, a signature that would stand up in a court of law for the length of one morning. "You're in trouble," he said. "I am in arithmetic," she answered, "which is worse, because arithmetic cannot be argued with." A log settled in the grate. Somewhere above their heads, a board creaked under a sleeper's turn. The innkeeper, wiping the same tankard he had been wiping for 10 minutes, watched them both with the open avidity of a man who would have this story to sell for a year. "Tell me the sum," the stranger said. So she told him, fast, in the flat clerk's voice she had learned at her father's elbow when she was 9 years old, and he had discovered she could add a column quicker than his man of business. Her name was Rosalind Vane. Her father had been Sir Henry Vane of Vane Court in the county of Kent, and he had loved her the way a man loves a good steward, thoroughly, gratefully, and without ever once asking what she wanted. He had kept her at the estate books since she could hold a pen. He had meant to settle her future the way he settled everything, with a clause. And he had drafted the clause, and then he had taken a chill at Christmas and been carried off by it inside a fortnight. 8 months gone, before the ink of his intentions was anything but ink. The clause was this: on the morning Rosalind Vane turned 25, if she were not by then a married woman, the guardianship of her person and the whole administration of Vane Court passed to her cousin, Mr. Crispin Vane, until such time as she reached the age of 30. Crispin to hold the rents, Crispin to keep the house, Crispin to grant or refuse her an allowance as he saw fit, Crispin to decide where she lived and on what. "And you turn 25, the stranger said, "at dawn." At dawn. She turned her father's small watch over in her palm. She'd carried it 8 months and worn the engraving half away with her thumb. "I had a remedy. I was betrothed. A perfectly respectable man named Mr. Harlan Bell, who liked Vane Court and tolerated me, and who would have signed his name in April and made the clause so much waste paper. 3 days ago, Mr. Bell discovered that a brewer's daughter near Maidstone has £11,000 and no inconvenient cleverness. And he discovered it, sir, in time to break with me, and not in time for me to find another. So you took the road." "I took the road. I have a great aunt at Tunbridge, who I hoped might know some widower in want of a wife, and not particular as to the hour. My great aunt, I have learned tonight from her own letter, forwarded to this inn, is at Bath, and will not return until Michaelmas. She laid the watch down beside the man's untouched cup with a small, precise click, as if she were setting down the last counter in a game she had lost. "It is 6 hours to dawn. There is no clergyman within reach who will marry me, but the curate at the church on the rise, who owes the crossed keys a debt he would rather pay in favours than in coin. And there is, in the whole of this taproom, exactly one man unmarried, of age, and unknown to my cousin." She lifted her grey eyes to his. "You see the sum." For a moment he did not answer her at all. The fire moved its light over his face, which was not a comfortable face, too hard at the jaw, too watchful at the eyes, and she had the sudden disorienting sense of being read the way she read a ledger, line by line, totals carried. "Crispin Vane," he said. "Your cousin. He wants the house." "My cousin wants the house, the rents, the consequence, and the satisfaction of seeing me ask him for my own pin money on quarter day." She heard the heat come into her voice and pressed it flat. A bargain is not struck with heat. "He has spent 8 months being kind to me in front of witnesses and writing to my father's solicitor in private. He will be at Vane Court by noon tomorrow, with a carriage to carry me to whichever of his properties he finds least troublesome, and he will be smiling. I would marry a chimney sweep to stop him. You are better dressed than a chimney sweep, and you are here." That, at last, moved something at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, but the ghost of where a smile would go. "A flattering proposal," he said. "It is an honest one. I have nothing else to offer. I will not pretend to a sentiment I have known you 4 minutes to feel." "No," he agreed. "I don't suppose you will." He picked up her father's watch. He did it without asking, turning it to the firelight, and she nearly snatched it back. But his thumb found the worn place on the engraving, the place her own thumb had worn, and something in the way he touched it stopped her hand halfway. He read the inscription. "To my Rosalind, who keeps the account." He set it down again exactly where it had been. £100, he said. £100 and my gratitude, which is worth a good deal less, but is also yours. "Keep the £100. You'll want it more than I will." He stood. He was taller than the low beam over the table, and he ducked it without seeming to think, the way a man does in his own house, and she filed the smallness of that away without yet knowing why. "Where is this curate?" She rose so fast her chair scraped. "You agree?" "I have nothing to do until Thursday," said the stranger, "and you have a cousin who wants smiling at. I find I should like to spoil his morning." He took up his hat from the bench. "What do I call you, between here and the church?" "Miss Vane. After the church, your widow, your nothing, your £100 bargain. Call me whatever is convenient." She was already moving toward the door, already counting the minutes against the dark. "And you, sir? What do I call you?" He was a half step behind her, and the firelight did not reach the doorway, so she did not see his face when he answered. "Gray," he said. "Mr. Gray. It will do for a register." The church stood on the rise above the inn, a squat Norman thing with a tower like a clenched fist, and the warm night lay over the churchyard, so still that Rosalind could hear the grass seed ticking in the hedge. There had been thunder in the south at sunset, a low, far grumble over the weald, and the air still carried the held breath that comes before a summer storm that may, in the end, decide to go round. Her slippers were ruined inside the first 10 yards. She did not slow for them. Mr. Gray walked beside her without offering his arm, which she was grateful for, and without filling the silence with reassurance, which she was more grateful for still. He had got a lantern from the inn, and he carried it low, so that it lit the path and not their faces. Once, where the lane dipped and the dew had pooled, he put out a hand to the small of her back to steady her over the slick stones, and took it away again the instant she had her feet, and neither of them remarked on it. "You will want to know," she said, because a bargain is cleaner when both parties understand it. That there is nothing in this for you to be caught by. The marriage protects the estate from my cousin, but the estate is entailed strictly through my person. A husband gains the use of nothing he does not earn, and I have drawn the settlement myself to be certain of it. You sign. You are fed and housed at Vane Court as long as it amuses you to stay, which I imagine will be a week. Then you go, and the law calls me a married woman the rest of my days, and my cousin may smile at the wall. You've thought about it. I have done nothing else for 3 days but think about it. I am very good at thinking about it. It is the one thing my father trained me to. And the husband? Mr. Gray asked. What does he get besides a week's board and the pleasure of your cousin's disappointment? She had not, in truth, an answer ready, because in 3 days of arithmetic she had not once supposed the column marked husband would have feelings to consult. The omission embarrassed her, and she covered the embarrassment the way she covered everything, with precision. He gets the satisfaction, she said, of having done a useful thing for a stranger who needed it, and no entanglements after. Most men would call that a bargain. You strike me as a man who would call it a bargain. Do I? You strike me as a man, she went on, warming to the small cruelty of being right about people, which was a vice of hers, who is riding through this part of the country to be where no one expects him, doing no business that wants a name attached to it, and who would just as soon not be asked his own. A man like that has every reason to sign Mr. Gray in a country register and ride on. I'm offering you a way to be useful that costs you nothing and asks you nothing. You should be thanking me. The lantern swung. For 3 full steps, he said nothing at all, and she had time to wonder whether she had cut nearer a bone than she meant to. She had a gift for that, and her father had told her so, fondly, as if it were a parlour trick and not a thing that emptied rooms. You read a man quickly, Mr. Gray said at last. I read accounts quickly. Men are simpler than accounts. They carry their balances in their faces. And what does my face carry, Miss Vane? She glanced up at him in the swinging light, and she meant to deliver some clean, dry verdict and have done. But the light caught his eyes at the wrong moment, or the right one, and what she saw there was not the blank of a man with nothing to hide. It was the careful blank of a man with a great deal to hide, and long practice at hiding it. She knew that blank. She wore it herself, every quarter day, across a table from Crispin. Debt, she said, more slowly than she had intended. A debt of some kind. You are paying something off, and you have decided I am part of the payment, and you have not told me what the rest of it is. The corner of his mouth did the thing again, the almost smile that never quite arrived. You should have been a magistrate, he said. I should have been a great many things. The list is long and the law is short. The tower loomed over them now, blacker than the sky. A light burned in the curate's window at the foot of it, a thin, watchful yellow. There, he is awake. Whatever your debt is, sir, settle it on someone else's mourning. Tonight I only need your hand and your name, and the name need not even be true. Shall we? Mr. Gray looked up at the lit window, and then down at her, and the lantern steadied between them. After you, he said. The Reverend Septimus Pell was 33, terrified of his own bishop, and very much in debt to the Crossed Keys, where he had run up a score across 2 harvests of being too poor to do otherwise and too lonely to drink at home. He met them at the vestry door in a nightshirt and a cassock pulled on crooked over it, holding a candle in one hand and a half-eaten apple in the other, and he looked at the 2 of them on his step with the expression of a man watching weather come that he had been promised would not come. Miss Vane, he said, it is the middle of the night. It is. I am sorry for it, Mr. Pell. And I will be sorrier in a moment, because I am going to ask you for the thing you have been dreading since the landlord told you I might come. Rosalind stepped into the candlelight so he could see her face, because she had learned that people refused a shadow more easily than they refused a person. I am going to ask you to marry me. Tonight, by license. You have a license? She produced it from inside her glove, where it had ridden warm against her wrist for 40 miles. A common license, got from the surrogate at Maidstone in April for her wedding to Mr. Bell, with the bridegroom's name left blank, because Mr. Bell's lawyer had been particular about a settlement that was never signed. A common license permits a marriage in the parish where one party has dwelt 15 days. Rosalind had dwelt, by the surrogate's reckoning, nowhere. But a license in the hand at midnight is a different document from a license examined by a bishop's clerk at leisure. And she was wagering Mr. Pell's fear of the crossed keys ledger against his fear of the bishop's. The bridegroom's name is blank, Mr. Pell said, faintly, reading it. It will not be blank in a quarter of an hour. The curate's eyes went to Mr. Gray, who had taken off his hat and stood in the vestry doorway, saying nothing, filling it the way he had filled the inn doorway, and Mr. Pell's throat worked. "Sir," he said, are you entering into this freely and not for any consideration?" "I'm entering into it freely," Mr. Gray said. "The consideration is £100 I've declined, and a morning I'd like to ruin for a man I've never met. Will that trouble your conscience, Reverend?" "It troubles my conscience extremely," said Mr. Pell, with sudden, unexpected dignity, drawing his crooked cassock straight. "I am a poor clergyman, sir, but I am a clergyman, and the office is not a thing I will sell across a vestry step like a—" He stopped. He looked at Rosalind, and whatever he had been going to say went out of him, because he had buried her father, and he had seen Crispin Vane's carriage in the lane twice this summer, and he was not, for all his terror, a stupid man. "Like a side of bacon," he finished, weakly. Come in, both of you, before the sexton's wife sees the light and we are all of us undone. Lord forgive me. Mrs. Pell, my dear, wake up. We have need of a witness and a clean surplice." What followed, Rosalind would remember the rest of her life in pieces, the way one remembers a fever. The cold of the stone floor coming up through her ruined slippers. The 2 candles Mrs. Pell lit on the altar rail, and how their flames stood perfectly still in the breathless air, and then trembled, all together, when the first far sigh of the storm wind found the cracks in the old glass. Mr. Pell's voice, steadying as he found the words, because the words were older than his fear and carried him. The smell of beeswax and apple, and the dust of summer. Mrs. Pell weeping comfortably into the surplice she had not had time to put on him, out of the pure pleasure of a wedding, any wedding, at any hour. And Mr. Gray's hand, when the moment came that she had to give him hers, large and warm and entirely steady, closing over her cold fingers as though her hand were a thing that might be dropped and broken, and was not going to be. "Wilt thou have this man?" said Mr. Pell. "I will," said Rosalind Vane, and discovered she had to clear her throat to do it. "Wilt thou have this woman?" There was the smallest pause. The candles trembled again. And then, "I will," said Mr. Gray, and his voice did a curious thing on the words, went rough at the edge, as if he had surprised himself by meaning them. Then it was over, as fast as it had begun, and Mr. Pell was leading them to the vestry table, where the great parish register lay open under a single candle, the page ruled and waiting, and dipping the pen and handing it first to her. She signed, Rosalind Ann Vane, in the small upright hand her father had drilled into her. Her own name for the last time. She found she felt nothing about that she had expected to feel. Then Mr. Pell turned the pen and offered it to the bridegroom, and Mr. Gray bent over the book. He hesitated. Rosalind saw it. A half-second's stillness of the nib above the paper. The way a man hesitates at the lip of a thing he cannot take back. And then his hand moved, and she watched the letters come, watched them upside down across the table and right side up in the curate's widening eyes, and her own arithmetic, her careful 3-day sum, came apart in her hands like wet paper. He did not write Gray. He wrote in a bold, black scholar's hand that had signed 1,000 documents and feared none of them. Julian Marcus Thorne. And beneath the name, where the register asked his rank or profession or condition, he wrote one word, and the word was Duke. Duke of Harrogate. The candle guttered. Mrs. Pell made a sound like a kettle, and Rosalind Vane, who had married a stranger to keep her house, stood in a cold Norman vestry at 1 in the morning, and understood that she had just become, by her own scheming hand, the wife of one of the 6 most powerful men in England, a man whose lands she had been walking across all night, whose name was on the very milestone at the foot of the rise, whose face was in the print shop windows of London, and whom she had spent the road from the inn telling, with great satisfaction, that she could read him like a ledger. "You will observe," said the Duke of Harrogate, setting down the pen, and now the almost smile had finally fully arrived, "that the name need not even be true. Your words, Miss Vane. I only signed an honest one." She did not throw the inkstand at him, though she considered it with real longing, and the cost of the curate's register stayed her hand more than dignity did. She waited until Mr. Pell had blotted the page with shaking sand, until Mrs. Pell had been thanked and the marriage lines folded into her glove beside the spent license, until they were out again under the held storm, with the lantern between them, and the church door shut on the curate's stunned face. Then she stopped in the middle of the lane, and turned on him. "You are the Duke of Harrogate?" "I am." The Duke of Harrogate was sitting alone in the tap-room of the Crossed Keys, in a coat his own gamekeeper would be ashamed of, drinking ale he did not drink, on the road through his own land. All true. He had the grace, at least, not to laugh at her, though the laugh was plainly somewhere about him, banked like a fire. "You're angry?" "I am recalculating." She pressed her father's watch hard into her palm, the worn engraving biting her skin, because the watch was the one fixed point left in a night that had thrown off every other figure she trusted. "I came to that inn looking for a nobody I could marry and discard and never see again, a name on a page that meant nothing to anyone. Do you understand what you have done? My cousin wanted Vanecourt. He will read in tomorrow's post that I have married a duke, and he will not see a discarded bargain. He will see a connection to fight, a fortune to contest, a settlement to break. You have not closed the account. You have opened a far worse one, and put your name to it, for the pleasure of a joke." The wind came up the lane at last, warm and full of the south, and it lifted the dust and the lantern flame and a loose curl of her dark hair, and for a moment the storm light flickered far off behind the tower, so that she saw his face whole. He was not laughing. "No," he said. "I didn't sign it for the joke. The joke came after." He set the lantern down on the top of the stile so that it lit them both, deliberately, as if he had decided to stop hiding in shadow. "You told me, on this road, that I was a man paying off a debt and hadn't told you the rest of it. You were right. Shall I tell you the rest of it now, Duchess? Since we're married and you've drawn the settlement, and there are apparently no entanglements." "Do not call me that." "It's your name now. You signed for it the same as I did." He folded his arms, and the plain brown coat strained again, and she understood the coat now, the borrowed roughness of it, the way she understood her own quarter-day face. 3 weeks ago, my aunt, the Dowager Duchess, informed me that I would marry Lady Sophia Carlow at the close of the season. Lady Sophia is handsome, accomplished, of impeccable family, and has wanted to be Duchess of Harrogate since she was 16. Wanted the title, you understand, the way you want a column to come right. She has never once, in 2 years of being thrown at my head, asked me a single question she did not already know I'd like the answer to. My aunt has the betrothal drawn. The settlements are with the lawyers. The announcement was to go to the Gazette on Friday. The pieces turned and fell into place with the soft, awful click of an account balancing. "And it is Tuesday," Rosalind said. "It is Tuesday, and I rode out of London 2 days ago in my gamekeeper's coat, to have 3 days of being no one, before I became, for the rest of my life, exactly what everyone has always wanted me to be, which is a title with a pulse." The far thunder spoke again. He did not raise his voice over it. And then a furious, dust-covered, magnificently rude woman walked the length of a taproom and asked me to marry her by dawn for £100 and her gratitude, and made it perfectly plain that she wanted nothing on God's earth from me but my signature and my absence. "Do you know, Miss Vane, that you are the first person in 11 years to ask me for less than everything?" She stared at him. The lantern hissed. "So you see," the Duke of Harrogate said, and now the bitterness in it was real and old, and had nothing to do with her at all. "I did not ruin your account for a joke. I ruined my aunt's. You needed a husband who could not be set aside, and, as it happens, I needed, very badly, to already be married before Friday. You read me like a ledger, and you missed the largest entry on the page. We have, Miss Vane, made precisely the same bargain. Each of us has married a stranger to escape someone who wanted to own us. The only difference between us is that you knew what you were doing, and I have known you for 2 hours, and I would still do it again." For the length of 3 breaths, neither of them spoke. The wind moved the long grass of the churchyard with a sound like the sea. Below them, in the inn-yard, a single late light went out. "Well," said Rosalind Vane, Duchess of Harrogate, when she could trust her voice to come out level, "this is a great deal more complicated than arithmetic." "Yes," he agreed, "and you might have told me before I signed. You might have asked my name before you proposed." She opened her mouth and shut it, because the account would not balance in her favour on that point, and she was too honest to pretend it did. Far off, the storm thought better of itself and began, by slow degrees, to go round to the east, and the held breath of the night let out, and a few warm drops fell and then stopped, as if even the weather had decided to wait and see what these two would do. "Then, I suppose," she said, "Your Grace, that we had better decide what we are going to tell my cousin." They did not ride for Vane Court that night. There was the matter of the Duke's horse, and the Duke's man, a silent, grizzled person named Foley, who had been waiting 2 days at a farm 3 miles off with the rest of the baggage and the Duke's own clothes, and the matter, raised by the innkeeper's wife with enormous delicacy, of where exactly a newly married couple were to be put in an inn with 2 clean rooms, and one of them taken by a wool factor from Rye. The Duke settled it by giving the wool factor £5 to be delighted with the stable loft, which the wool factor was, and by handing Rosalind into the vacated room with a bow of such perfect correctness that she could find no fault in it, and then bidding her good night from the threshold and going to sit, she later learned, the rest of the dark in the tap-room by the dead fire, so that no servant in the place could carry a tale of where the Duke of Harrogate had spent his wedding night. "He is being," said Tippy, Rosalind's maid, who had set out from Vane Court on a hired hack the hour she discovered her mistress gone, traced her by the same forwarded letter that had named the inn, and caught them up at 2 in the morning in a state of magnificent outrage, and who was now brushing 40 miles of road out of her mistress's hair with more force than strictly the dust required. "A gentleman. He is being careful," said Rosalind. "He is being a duke, miss, your grace. Oh, I shall never get my mouth round it." Tibby set down the brush. In the small mirror, her round, honest face was creased with worry, and a kind of fierce delight she could not entirely hide. "A duke. You went to find a sweep, and you have come back with a duke. Sir Henry always did say you would overbuy at market." And Rosalind, who had held herself in rule and column since 3 days before her own ruined wedding, who had not wept when Mr. Bell's note came, nor when her great-aunt's letter came, nor in the cold vestry when she gave her hand to a stranger. Rosalind put her face in her hands at her own father's joke in her maid's mouth, and laughed until the laugh turned, briefly and privately, into something else, and Tibby held her, and the candle burned down, and outside the window, the summer dawn she had married to outrun, came up grey and gold over the Duke of Harrogate's quiet fields, exactly as if nothing in the world had changed. She was 25. She was married. The clause was waste paper. It was, she thought, looking at the dawn, the most expensive £100 she had never had to pay. They had taken the road for Kent at first light, the Duke's own travelling chaise and 4 fast horses eating the 40 miles in a single hard morning, that the grey mare and the baggage were left to follow at leisure. So that by the time Crispin Vane arrived at Vane Court at noon the next day, with the travelling carriage, a man of business, and a face arranged for sympathy, exactly as Rosalind had foretold, she had been an hour in her own house, and out of her ruined travelling silk. And he found his cousin in the morning room, in a gown of deep amber summer silk, pouring chocolate for a broad-shouldered gentleman in a coat that had quite certainly not come from any country tailor, and he understood that something had gone very wrong with his arithmetic before either of them said a word. "Cousin Rosalind," he said, recovering, because Crispin always recovered. It was the most dangerous thing about him. He was a year older than the Duke, and a head handsomer in the conventional way, fair where Harrogate was dark, smooth where Harrogate was hard, and he came into a room as if the room had been waiting for him. "I came the moment I heard you had quitted Kent. You gave us such a fright. A young woman, alone on the public road, and on such a day. Your nerves, after the disappointment with Mr. Bell. I've been imagining 100 dreadful things." "How kind," said Rosalind. "As you see, I am perfectly safe. May I present my husband?" She let the words sit in the warm air a moment before she finished it, and she watched her cousin's eyes the way her father had taught her to watch a debtor's hands. "The Duke of Harrogate. Julian, my cousin, Mr. Crispin Vane, of whom you have heard me speak." It was a pleasure she had not anticipated, and would remember a long time, to watch a clever man do sums very fast behind a smiling face, and arrive at a total he did not like. "Harrogate," said Crispin Vane. The smile held. Only the smile. I had not, that is, the connection is not one I had heard announced. "It is very new," said the Duke pleasantly, rising, and he did not offer his hand, and the omission was so exactly calibrated to rank that Crispin's own half-lifted hand had to find its way back to his side as if it had only ever meant to adjust his cuff. "We married last night, by license, at the church above the Crossed Keys. Your cousin was good enough to have me. I am aware it is sudden. I find I have no patience at my age for the slowness of the usual forms. When a thing is right, why should a man wait 3 weeks and the convenience of the newspapers?" He smiled. "I imagine you, of all men, are glad to see Miss Vane, forgive me, the Duchess, so well settled and so far beyond the reach of any little difficulty in poor Sir Henry's will. A guardianship is a heavy charge. You are relieved of it. I am sure you are relieved." The man of business by the door made a small, involuntary noise and turned it into a cough. Crispin Vane stood in the morning room of the house he had counted his own since Christmas, and Rosalind watched him weigh, behind the unbroken smile, exactly what it would cost to fight a duke, and exactly what it would cost to bow. And she saw him choose, for now, to bow. "Of course," he said. "Of course I am relieved. My dear cousin, your grace, you must forgive a family's natural concern. We are very fond of Rosalind, in our way." His pale eyes moved over her once, over the amber silk, over the Duke, over the whole unwelcome sum of it, and came back to her face. And for just a moment the smile thinned to the thing underneath it, which was patient and cold, and not in the least defeated. I shall wish to pay my respects properly, naturally. A wedding call, with my mother and perhaps Mr. Soames here, who managed dear Henry's affairs, and will be so glad to set the estate's papers in order for the new arrangement. Within the week, if it is convenient. There is a great deal of family business that a marriage of this kind rather complicates. We should be glad to receive you, said the Duke. Within the week, Rosalind agreed, and smiled, and poured a third cup of chocolate that no one wanted, because her hand wished to do something other than make a fist, and she would not give her cousin the satisfaction. When the carriage had gone, the Duke of Harrogate stood at the window watching the dust of it settle on the avenue, and he said, without turning round, in a voice quite empty of the morning's banter, "He has not given it up." "No," said Rosalind. "He has gone to find a lawyer cleverer than my father's. He will try to break us. Coercion, fraud, a marriage of convenience entered into to defeat the lawful provision of the will. He will try all of it, and he will smile the whole time." She came to stand beside him at the window. The summer haze lay gold over the park, over the lime avenue her father had planted, over the home she had married a duke to keep. "You said last night that we had made the same bargain. I think, Your Grace, that we may have to make a longer one than either of us intended." He looked down at her. The hard, watchful face had no joke in it now. "Then we had better," he said, "learn to be married." Learning to be married, it turned out, was a project, and Rosalind Vane had never in her life met a project she could leave half-summed. They agreed the terms on the second day, in the estate office, across the very table where she had kept her father's books, because it was the only room in the house where she felt entirely herself, and she found she wanted the Duke to meet that self before any other. She laid it out plainly. Crispin would not strike at the marriage directly. A Duke was too large a target. But at its honesty, he would gather every servant's whisper, every neighbour's raised brow, every hour the Duke and Duchess of Harrogate spent apart, and he would assemble from them a picture of a sham, a cold paper bargain. And he would carry that picture to a court of chancery and ask it to look at the timing. A wedding by midnight license on the very eve of the guardianship. A husband no one had heard named, a bride who could not have known him a week. And to conclude that the whole was a fraud upon the will, and to set it aside, and to deliver her, after all, into her cousin's keeping. "Then the answer is simple," said the Duke. "There is no simple answer in Chancery. Chancery is where simple answers go to grow old." "The answer," he said, ignoring this, in the way she was beginning to understand he ignored most things he had already decided about, "is that we must not be a sham. If your cousin wishes to prove the marriage cold and hollow, then we will be, in front of every servant and neighbour and raised brow in the county, the warmest and most thoroughly married pair in the south of England. We will be seen. We will be seen riding, dining, walking the park, sitting too long over the chessboard, laughing at things that aren't funny. We will give him nothing to gather but evidence against himself." He paused. "It need not be true. It need only be visible. You of all people should find that congenial. Your words again. It need not even be true." She looked at him, across her father's table for a long moment. "You are quoting me at myself a great deal, Your Grace, for a man who has known me 3 days. I have a good memory for accounts," he said, "that don't balance. And yours, Duchess, has not balanced since the moment you decided you could read me. It's the most interesting thing about you, and I have met a great many duchesses." He stood and held out his hand across the table, not to be kissed, but to be shaken, as one party of a contract to another. A working marriage, visible warmth, private rule. You keep your books, I keep my distance, and at the end of it your cousin goes home with nothing, and I go to my aunt and tell her the Gazette may keep its Friday. Shall we shake on it, Miss Vane? You like a bargain you've drawn yourself." Rosalind Vane looked at the broad, scarred hand, held out over the ledgers of the house she loved, and she thought of all the bargains she had ever struck. With Mr. Bell, who tolerated her, with her father, who used her, with Crispin, who smiled at her, and she could not, turning it over, find the entry in any of them where someone had offered her a thing and then, in the same breath, handed her the means to be certain of it. She shook his hand. His grip was warm and dry and careful, and it closed over hers exactly as it had at the altar, as if her hand were a thing worth not breaking. And she took hers back a half-second slower than the bargain required, and neither of them remarked on it. "We shall need," she said businesslike to cover the half-second, "to be very convincing." "We shall need," the Duke agreed, "to practice." They practiced. It was, Rosalind would think later, the strangest courtship in the history of the institution, because it was a courtship designed and minuted like a campaign, and it courted no one but the eyes of the county, and it had a clause in it forbidding either party to mean a word. And it worked, slowly, the way a fire works, from the outside in, so that by the time either of them noticed the warmth, they were already standing too near to step back from it. They rode out together every morning before the heat came up, because a husband and wife who ride at dawn are seen by every tenant and dairymaid in the parish and reported on with approval. He rode a great black brute of a horse that no one else at Harrogate would mount, and she rode her father's old grey mare that she had had brought up from Kent, and they raced, the first morning, the length of the long water meadow. She had not meant to. He had said something insufferable about ladies in the side saddle, and she beat him by a length and a half, because the grey knew the ground, and the black did not, and she turned at the end of the meadow, flushed and furious with triumph, and found him laughing, openly, fully, for the first time since the tap room, his head back and the hard face entirely undone by it. "You let me win," she accused. "Madam," said the Duke of Harrogate, wiping his eyes, "I have never let anyone win anything in my life." "You won. I am reassembling my opinion of side saddles." He looked at her, the grey mare blowing between them in the gold morning, the huge haze already rising off the cut hay, and he said, more quietly, "You should be flushed and furious more often. It suits you better than the ledger face. Don't tell me. It need not be true. I'll have it carved over the door." "You are insufferable, Your Grace." "So my aunt informs me. It's the only thing she and I have ever agreed on. Come, the Hartley's dairy is over the rise, and old Mrs. Hartley will have seen us race and will tell the whole congregation on Sunday that the new Duchess sits a horse like a hussar. Let us go and be charming at her, and give your cousin nothing." So they went and were charming at Mrs. Hartley, and at the vicar, and at the assembly rooms at the county town, where the Duke of Harrogate had not danced in 3 years, and now danced twice with his own wife, and once, with grim courtesy, with the formidable Lady Carlo, mother of the abandoned Sophia, who smiled with her mouth and looked daggers with her eyes, and said, audibly to her neighbour, that some people's good fortune was very sudden, and would no doubt be very brief. And in between the being seen, there was the not being seen, which was where the trouble started, because a campaign cannot be all parade. There were the evenings. Vane Court had no great company, and the Duke, who was supposed within the week to grow bored and invent business, did not invent business. He stayed. And in the long, light summer evenings, when the windows stood open to the garden and the moths came into the candles, they fell, without quite deciding to, into the habit of each other. He found her father's chess set, and discovered she played a cold, ferocious game, and lost to her 3 nights running, with every appearance of enjoyment. She discovered that the Duke of Harrogate, who could not be read, could be made to talk, about anything but himself at first, and then, by slow inches, about himself. About the brother he had not expected to outlive, the laughing, reckless older brother, who had been the Duke and the heir and the favourite, and had broken his neck at a fence 11 years ago, and left the title to Julian, who had been a second son with a second son's freedom and a second son's plans, and had buried all of them in a single afternoon. And ever since, Rosalind said, on the fourth such evening, moving her bishop, everyone has wanted the Duke, and no one has wanted the man who got left holding it. He looked at the board for a long time without moving. You really are unbearable, he said at last, the way you do that. I told you, men carry their balances in their faces. Yours has been carrying that one since the tap room. She took his bishop. Check, Your Grace, and, for whatever it is worth, from a woman you have known a week, I am sorry for your brother, not because you are a duke, because you laughed just now, telling me about the fence, and then your hand went to your ring, and you stopped laughing. And you have been doing that small thing all week, and thinking no one counts it. I count everything. It is my one talent, and my chief defect. She moved her queen. Mate in 3, shall I show you, or shall you suffer? The Duke of Harrogate looked at his cornered king, and then at his wife across the chessboard in the mothlight, the amber silk gone soft in the candle glow, the grey eyes that missed nothing, fixed on him with a directness no one had turned on him in 11 years. And he thought, with the clear, unwelcome certainty of a man reading his own account at last, I am in a great deal more difficulty than Chancery. Show me, he said. The wedding call came on the 7th day as promised, and it was worse than Rosalind had feared, because Crispin had not come to bluster. He had come to gather. He arrived with his mother, the widowed Mrs. Augusta Vane, a soft-spoken woman with hard hands, who had wanted Vane Court for her son since the boy could walk, and with Mr. Soames, her father's old man of business, who had a way of looking at a room and pricing it. And the 3 of them sat in the drawing-room for 2 hours, being so warm, so familial, so delighted, that the warmth lay over the visit like oil on water, and everyone in the room could see straight through it to the cold below. Crispin asked, smiling, after the Duke's London house, and how strange it must be for dear Rosalind to be torn so soon between Kent and town. He asked, smiling, whether the marriage settlements had yet been drawn, since, of course, poor Henry's affairs were so tangled, and he, Crispin, would be only too happy to assist Mr. Soames in untangling them, in the family interest. He asked, smiling, where the Duke had been staying in the neighbourhood before the wedding, and for how long, since the licence, he had taken the liberty of inquiring at Maidstone, appeared to name a residence the bride could not quite have established. He laid each question down like a card, and watched to see which one made her flinch. She did not flinch. She had been raised by Sir Henry Vane to keep a face across a table, and she kept it, and she answered each question with a true thing that revealed nothing. The licence, she knew, was the weakest of his cards. A marriage once solemnized in church was not undone by an irregular licence. Every lawyer in England knew it, and Crispin best of all, which was why he had laid that card down lightly and watched her face and not the page. It was not the licence he meant to win on. It was the timing, the haste, the whole shape of a wedding that looked manufactured. And she watched her cousin gather his nothings with his patient, cold smile, and she understood that he had all the time in the world and a court that loved exactly this kind of doubt, and that warmth in parade would not be enough. He would not be defeated by being given nothing. He would have to be defeated by being given a wall he could not get over. It was Mrs. Vane who found the crack, soft-voiced Augusta, refilling her own teacup, who said sweetly into a pause, "And of course, dear Rosalind, you will be so glad of the company at Harrogate Castle, for I hear the Dowager Duchess keeps great state there, and is so devoted to her nephew. She will be like a mother to you. Have you met her yet, dear? Such a near connection, and not at your own wedding." And Rosalind saw Crispin's eyes sharpen, because his mother had handed him, without knowing it, the largest crack of all. The Dowager Duchess of Harrogate, who had drawn a betrothal her nephew had jilted by midnight for a stranger. the Dowager Duchess, who had no more reason to acknowledge this marriage than Crispin had, and a great deal more power to refuse it. A duke's wife, unacknowledged by the duke's own family, was a duke's wife with a hole in her hull, and Crispin Vane had just been shown precisely where to put the iron.
"Not yet,"
said Rosalind, smooth as glass.
"Her Grace is at the castle, and we have been but a week wed. The call is to come. You are kind to think of it."
But she saw her cousin file it away, and she saw him rise, at the end of the 2 hours, entirely satisfied, and bow over her hand with real warmth now, because he had found his lever. And when the carriage had gone, the second carriage in a week to leave dust on her father's avenue, she stood in the empty drawing-room with the cold tea going colder, and she did a thing she had sworn at the altar she would never do. She told the Duke of Harrogate the truth about how frightened she was. "He will go to your aunt," she said. "He will go to the Dowager, and he will be charming, and he will offer her exactly what she wants, a way to be rid of me and set you free for Lady Sophia, and call it a kindness to the family name. She has every reason to take it. A marriage broken in chancery for fraud is a scandal, but a marriage quietly annulled because it was never a true marriage." She made herself say it. She had drawn the settlement. She could say the words. "Because it was never consummated, and entered in haste, and repented at leisure, is a misfortune the Dowager can shape into a story that frees us both. I give Crispin Vane the marriage. He gives the Dowager her Lady Sophia. They divide the spoils, and I go back to Kent in my cousin's keeping after all. And you marry where your aunt chooses, and the only people who lose are the two who actually drew the bargain." Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. "I have summed it, Your Grace. Every way I sum it, that is the total. We were clever for a week. He has been patient for 30 years. The Duke stood by the cold hearth and looked at her, and the summer evening came gold through the windows, and somewhere out in the park a thrush was singing the long light down. "You've left out a figure," he said. "I never leave out figures." "You've left out the largest one. You keep doing it. I told you it was the most interesting thing about you." He crossed the room to her. He did not touch her. He stood close enough that she had to lift her face to keep his eyes, and his voice, when it came, was very low and entirely without its banter. "Your sum assumes that I want to be freed. It assumes that the Gazette and Lady Sophia and my aunt's choosing are the prize at the end of the column, and that you are the cost. You have summed the whole account, Duchess, on the assumption that I would rather be a duke than be married to you." He paused. "Correct the assumption, and run it again." The thrush sang. The gold light moved on the floor. Rosalind Vane stood very still, the way one stands when the ground one has counted on is discovered to be a different ground entirely. "That," she said, with great difficulty, "is not a figure I know how to enter." "No," said the Duke of Harrogate gently. "I don't imagine it is. Neither did I a week ago." He stepped back and gave her room, and the air came in between them again. "We will go to my aunt. Tomorrow, before your cousin does. We will go to Harrogate Castle, and you will meet the Dowager Duchess, and we will not give her a hole to put the iron in, because there will be no hole." He took up his gloves from the table. At the door, he stopped and looked back, and the almost smile came, but softer than it had ever come. "And in the meantime, Duchess, I would be obliged if you would do me the very great favor of considering, strictly as a matter of arithmetic, you understand, what the account looks like if it is true after all." Harrogate Castle was not a house, but a statement, a long grey weight of stone above its own lake, and the Dowager Duchess of Harrogate met them in a saloon the size of Vane Court's whole ground floor, seated very upright in black silk, under a portrait of the dead son who should have been Duke, and she looked at Rosalind the way a jeweler looks at a stone brought in by a stranger who claims it is real. "So," said the dowager, "you are the inn-yard duchess my nephew has saddled the name with. Sit. Let me see what 11 generations have come to." It was, Rosalind understood, a battlefield, and she had been brought to it without a single weapon but herself, and the Duke had, deliberately she now saw, stood back the moment they entered the room, and left her to cross it alone, because nothing he could say in her defense would weigh half so much with the dowager as what she could be seen to be when no one defended her. So Rosalind Vane sat down across from the most formidable woman in 3 counties, and she did not simper, and she did not cower, and she did not pretend to a humility she did not feel. "I am the woman your nephew married, ma'am," she said. "I will not insult you by pretending it was a grand match. He found me at an inn, ruined and desperate, and trying to keep my father's house out of my cousin's hands. And he married me to do it, and to spite a betrothal he had not been asked his opinion of. You know the second part better than I do. I imagine you are very angry. I would be, in your place. You drew a good marriage for a nephew you love, and he threw it over for a stranger in the dark. And now the stranger is sitting in your saloon being looked at like a doubtful stone." She held the old woman's eyes. "I am a doubtful stone, ma'am. But I am not a paste one. Whatever else this marriage is or is not, I did not marry your nephew for his coronet. I did not know he had one until he had already signed the register. Of all the women who will ever sit in this chair, I am the only one you can be entirely certain wanted the man before she knew the Duke, because I spent the whole of our wedding night believing I had married a vagrant in a borrowed coat, and I was not sorry." The saloon was very quiet. Somewhere a clock the size of a cottage ticked. The Duke, by the window, did not move. The Dowager Duchess of Harrogate looked at the inn-yard duchess for a long, long moment, and something moved far back in the hard old eyes, something that might, in a softer woman, have been the beginning of respect. "Lady Sophia Carlo," said the Dowager at last, "has wanted this coronet since she was 16. I have watched her want it for 6 years, across 100 dinner tables, and I told myself that wanting it so steadily was a kind of fitness for it." She turned her head, slowly, to the portrait of her dead son, the laughing boy in hunting pink, and then back. "My elder son wanted nothing he had to wait for. It is why he is on that wall and not in this chair. I have spent 11 years trying to make his brother into him, and failing, and blaming the brother for it." The black silk rustled as she rose, and she was tall, taller than Rosalind had thought, and she crossed the great room and stood looking down at her nephew's wife. "You raced him across the water meadow on Tuesday and beat him. The Hartley woman told my housekeeper, who told me, as if it were a scandal. Is it true?" "By a length and a half, man," said Rosalind. "His horse did not know the ground." "His horse," said the Dowager Duchess of Harrogate, "has never known anything its master did not first tell it." And the corner of her mouth, in a face that had not been seen to smile since a boy in hunting pink came home over a led horse, moved exactly the way her nephew's did. The almost smile, the family inheritance, the thing that never quite arrived and had now, in 2 faces in 1 fortnight, arrived twice. "You will dine here. You will both dine here, and you will be seen to dine here. And tomorrow the county will know that the Dowager Duchess of Harrogate has received her nephew's wife and found her adequate. Let your cousin make what he can of that child. He will find it a great deal harder to prove a marriage a fraud when the bride sits at the head of my table on a Sunday." She turned for the door and paused, exactly as her nephew paused, the same lineage doing the same small thing. "And Rosalind, the next time you beat him across the meadow, see that more than the Hartley woman is watching. A duchess who can be seen to want to win is worth 10 who only want the winnings. I should know. I married the wrong kind once, and buried him, and have been the wrong kind myself for 50 years. the almost smile once more.
Do better than I did.
They drove back to Vane Court in the warm dusk, with the lamps lit and the moths blundering at the glass. And for a long while, neither of them spoke, because the day had been a battle won, and there is a tiredness after victory that is very like grief.
You stood back, Rosalind said at last. In the saloon. You let her have at me alone.
I did.
Why?
Because nothing I said would have weighed an ounce, and everything you said weighed pounds. And because... He turned his head against the squabs and looked at her in the lamplight, and the careful blank was entirely gone from his face now. Had been gone, she realized, for days. Because I wanted to watch you do it. I wanted to see the woman who walked the length of a taproom to ask a stranger for £100 worth of rescue walk the length of my aunt's saloon and rescue herself. You did not need me in that room, Rosalind. I have spent 11 years being needed for the title and never once for myself. And you sat in the worst chair in the worst room in the county, and you did not need me at all. And I have never in my life wanted so badly to be needed by someone who plainly did not require it. The carriage rocked. The lamp swung its small gold light between them.
That,
said Rosalind Vane, very low,
is dangerously close to a figure I cannot enter, Your Grace.
Julian, he said. Julian. Enter it, said the Duke of Harrogate. Strictly as arithmetic. You needn't mean it. It need not even be true. But his hand had found hers on the seat between them, and her cold fingers had turned and closed over his without her once deciding to let them. And the carriage carried them home through the summer dark, with the account, after a fortnight of careful columns, at last, and entirely out of balance, in the only direction that had ever mattered. It was, of course, exactly then, with the wall built, the dowager won, the marriage warm and witnessed, and nearly, terribly true, that Crispin Vane played the card he had been holding back the whole time, and very nearly took the trick. He did not come himself. That was the cleverness of it. A letter came instead, 3 mornings later, addressed to the Duke of Harrogate in a clerk's careful hand and marked private. And the Duke read it, standing at the breakfast table in the gold morning light, and Rosalind watched his face go, by slow degrees, from the open warmth she had grown used to, back to the careful taproom blank she had not seen in a fortnight. And she knew before he spoke that her cousin had found, somewhere, the one true thing that could be made to look like the worst thing. Your cousin, said the Duke, has been to London, to my lawyers, to my aunt's lawyers, and to mine, and he has been thorough. He laid the letter down. He has found the betrothal papers, Rosalind. Lady Sophia's settlements. The ones drawn 3 weeks ago, with my name on them, dated 9 days before I married you. He has copies. And he has a sworn statement from Lady Carlo that on the very night of our wedding, I was understood by my own family to be promised elsewhere. That I rode out of London a betrothed man, and married a stranger by midnight license the same week. And that this is not the conduct of a man entering a true marriage, but of a man manufacturing a false one in a hurry, to a woman who needed a husband by dawn, for reasons a court can read in poor Henry's will, as plain as print. He looked at her, and the worst of it was in his eyes before it was in his words. He means to put it to Chancery that I married you to defeat your cousin's guardianship as a favour and a fraud, that we have lived as strangers under one roof to keep up the show, and that the proof of it is that the Duke of Harrogate was a betrothed man 9 days before, and is, even now, the word came hard, even now no true husband to you in the one way a court will look at last. He is asking the court to find the marriage void. And the cruelty of it, Rosalind, the real cleverness of it, is that every single fact he has assembled is true. The breakfast room was very quiet. The thrush sang in the lime avenue, careless. Rosalind stood with her hand on the back of her father's chair, and she made herself sum it, because summing it was the only thing she knew how to do that was not weeping. And the total came up exactly as her cousin had built it to come up. Here was the figure she had been afraid to enter, entered now against her by another hand. Here was the truth of it, laid out in a clerk's careful column. That the Duke of Harrogate had been promised to a handsome, suitable, 6 years faithful woman of his aunt's choosing, and had married instead, in a fortnight's madness, a doubtful stone from an inn-yard, and that the world, and the law, and Lady Carlo, and Crispin would all read that madness the same way, the only way it could be read by anyone who had not sat across a chessboard from him in the mothlight and watched his hand go to his ring. He had married her in haste, to spite his aunt and rescue a stranger. He had wanted all along to be free, and her cousin had found the papers to prove it, and would set the marriage aside, and the dowager would have her Lady Sophia after all. And the only thing the last fortnight had been was a kindness, drawn out a little too long, a debt paid past its term, a man too decent to say plainly that the warmth had been the parade, and the parade had been the point. She had let herself enter the figure he told her to enter. She had let herself believe, in a carriage in the dark, that it might be true after all. And here, in a clerk's careful hand, was the proof that she had done the one thing her father had warned her never to do across a table. She had wanted the total to come right so badly that she had stopped checking the sum. "I see," said Rosalind Vane. "Rosalind, no, let me finish. I am very good at this. Let me do the one thing I am good at." Her voice was steady. She was distantly, coldly proud of how steady it was. "He is right, Your Grace. That is the whole horror of it. He is right. You were a betrothed man. You married me in a fortnight's temper at your aunt and a fortnight's pity for me. And you have been, every day since, exactly as decent to me as a decent man would be to a stranger he had bound himself to by accident. And I, who count everything, who pride myself that I miss nothing, I mistook the decency for the figure I wanted, and entered it in my own account, and ruled a line under it, and called it true." She lifted her chin. "You wanted to be free. You have only ever wanted, since your brother went over that fence, to be wanted for yourself. And I cannot even give you that cleanly, because the moment you signed Duke in that register, I became one more person who could not be sure she had not, after all, married the coronet. Let him have his chancery. Do not fight it on my account. I will not hold a man to a bargain he made in a temper, only because I was fool enough, at 25, with all my arithmetic, to start to—" She stopped. She would keep that one figure, at least, to herself. To miscount. And she walked out of the breakfast room, with her father's straight back, and her father's steady hand. And she did not weep where he could see it. And the thrush went on singing in the limes, as if the account had not just come after everything, so terribly and so falsely, out. She kept to the estate office the rest of that day, because it was the room where she was most herself and least a duchess. And she did what she had always done in trouble, which was to work. To take down the great ledgers of Vane Court and check the summer's columns line by line, the rents and the repairs, and the hay sold and the wages owed. The small, true, unglamorous arithmetic of a real place that loved her back in the only way a place can, by being exactly what it was. It was in the ledger that she found it. Not at once. It was past 4, and the light had gone long and gold across the office floor, when she came to the entry she herself had made 8 months ago, in the dreadful first week after her father's death, when Crispin had ridden over to be kind, and to take, gently, charge. And she had let him, because she was numb, look over the books with her. And she remembered now, with the ledger open under her hand, that he had borrowed the estate's own ledger for 3 days that week, to acquaint himself with the family's affairs, and returned it, and she had thought nothing of it, numb as she was. And here, in the book, between the entry for Michaelmas rents and the entry for her father's funeral charges, was a page whose stitching did not quite match the rest. A page very slightly newer than its neighbours. A page in her father's hand, or in a hand very like her father's hand. A hand that had had 3 days alone with a book and a model to copy. Recording a codicil to Sir Henry Vane's will, dated the November before he took his chill, witnessed by 2 names she did not know, providing that should his daughter Rosalind marry without the written consent of her cousin and guardian presumptive Crispin Vane, the whole estate should pass at once and absolutely to the said Crispin, the daughter to take only a life annuity of £200. It was a forgery. She knew it was a forgery, the way she knew her own name, because she had kept these books since she was 9, and she knew every page of them the way a shepherd knows his own hill. And this page had not been in the ledger when her father died. And more than that, far more than that, the codicil it recorded contradicted the very clause her cousin was even now relying on in Chancery. Because a man who had truly held a codicil, giving him the whole estate on her marriage, would never, ever have wanted her unmarried. He would have been driving suitors to her door. Crispin had forged a second weapon in the numb week after the funeral. A belt and braces cruelty. A trap to spring if the guardianship clause ever failed. And in his patience, in his 30 years of patience, he had grown so certain of his own cleverness that he had forgotten the one rule her father had drilled into her over this very ledger before she was 10 years old. Never forge an entry in a book kept by someone who reads it for love. They will always, always see the stitch. Rosalind Vane sat very still in the long gold light with the forged page under her hand, and the grief and the false arithmetic of the morning fell away from her like a coat she had been wearing in the wrong weather. And in its place came the old, cold, clear joy of a column that was finally, after long resistance, about to come right. She had been wrong about one figure that morning. She might be wrong about another. There was, she realized, only one way to check a sum she was afraid of, the way her father had taught her, which was to take it to the one other person who would know whether it balanced, and read it out and watch his face. She found the Duke of Harrogate in the library, where he had been the whole day, not writing to his lawyers, not riding for London, not doing any of the dozen things a man who wanted his freedom would have done with a day like this one. Only sitting, in the failing light, with her father's chessboard set up in front of him, and no opponent across it, turning his signet ring on his finger, round, and looking at nothing at all. "Julian," she said from the doorway. He stood at once. "Rosalind, I have been trying all day to find the words to stop, sit down. I have a sum to read you, and I need to watch your face while I read it, because there are 2 figures in it I got wrong this morning, and I can only check one of them myself." She crossed to the chess table and laid the great ledger down on it, open to the page with the unmatched stitch, and she sat across from him, exactly as she had sat across from him a fortnight ago in a taproom. 2 parties to a bargain, and she put her finger on the forged codicil. First figure. My cousin is a forger. This page is false. He made it in the week after my father died, with the book in his keeping, and it contradicts his own case in Chancery so completely that the moment it is laid before the court beside his sworn statement, his whole suit collapses and takes his name with it. We do not fight him on whether our marriage is true. We do not have to. We hand the court the proof that he is a forger, and Chancery, which loves doubt, you said, will discover it loves a forger even less. That is the first figure, and I've checked it 3 times, and it balances. Your cousin-in-law is finished, Your Grace. I found the stitch. She watched the understanding come into his face, and the fierce answering joy, and she let herself have one moment of pure professional satisfaction before she made herself go on to the second figure, which was the one she could not check alone. "Rosalind," he said, "that is, you brilliant, terrible woman, that is the easy figure," she said. "Here is the hard one, the one I got wrong this morning, and need you to tell me the value of, because I cannot read my own account in this.
It is the one ledger I have never been able to keep straight." Her steady voice was not quite steady now, and she let it not be, because a sum read false is worse than a sum read frightened. "This morning I entered it as proved that you wanted to be free, that the fortnight was a kindness, and the warmth was a parade, and the parade was the point. I ruled a line under it, and I walked out of the room. But I have been wrong about one figure in this book today already,
And it has made me wonder whether I am wrong about the other. Whether I entered it that way not because it balanced, but because I was so afraid it might come right, that I would rather call it false than check it and be a fool." She lifted her eyes to his. "So I am checking it, out loud, with you watching, the way my father taught me. Julian, do you want to be free?" The library was very quiet. The last of the gold light lay across her father's chessboard, across the forged page, across the small space of polished table between them. The Duke of Harrogate reached across it, and he took her ink-stained hand in his scarred one, and he turned it palm up. And with his thumb he found the small old callus on her finger, where a pen had sat since she was 9. And he pressed it, the way he had pressed the worn place on her father's watch the first night, as if it were a thing worth not breaking. And he said, "No." Just the one word, first, so that she would have it plainly, before any of the rest. "No, Rosamond, I do not want to be free. I have been free for 11 years. Free and wanted by everyone, and known by no one. Free as a coin is free, passing from hand to hand, and never once kept for itself. I rode out of London in a gamekeeper's coat to steal 3 days of being no one, and on the second night, a furious woman walked the length of a tap room and asked me for the smallest thing anyone has ever asked me for. And I have spent every day since discovering that she is the largest thing I have ever wanted. I signed Duke in that register to ruin my aunt's mourning. I would sign it again, twice over, to keep the right to sit across this board from you for the rest of my life and lose at chess." His hand tightened on hers. "Check the figure as many times as you like. It comes out the same every time, and it is true, and I do not care in the least whether you can be certain you wanted the man and not the coronet, because I am entirely certain that I want the woman who found the stitch. And that, Duchess, is the only column in either of our books that I have ever been sure of. Enter it. It is true. Rule your line." And Rosalind Vane, who counted everything, looked at the sum at last with all her arithmetic, and found that it balanced. Found that it had balanced all along, under the fear, the way the true total sits patient under every false one, until someone is brave enough to add the column again. And she came round the small table, and she put her arms around her husband's neck, and she kissed him in the long gold summer light. And it was, she would think much later, the first entry she'd ever made in any book purely because she wanted to, and not because it made anything come right. It made everything come right. But that, for once, was not the reason. Crispin Vane came to Vane Court a third and final time 11 days later, and this time he was not smiling. Because Mr. Soames, his mother's man of business, had taken one look at the forged codicil laid beside the genuine ledger and the sworn betrothal statement, and had understood at once that he was being asked to stake his own neck in chancery on a document a child could break, and had declined, loudly, in writing, to have any further part in the business of Mr. Crispin Vane. And the news of that declining had run round the county in 3 days, because nothing travels faster than a clever man's fall. He came alone, in a hired gig, not his own carriage, and he was shown not into the drawing-room, but into the estate office, where the Duke and Duchess of Harrogate waited for him on the same side of her father's table, and where the great ledger lay open between them to the page whose stitching did not match. "Cousin," said Rosalind. She did not rise. "Sit down. There is a sum I want to read you." He sat because there was nothing else to do, and the cold, patient smile tried to come, and could not. And she watched it fail with no pleasure at all, only a kind of cold finality, like the ruling of a last line. "You forged this," she said, laying her hand flat on the false page, the way she had laid her hands flat on the taproom table the night this all began. "In the week after my father died, when I let you take the ledger out of pity and numbness. You made a second trap in case the first one failed. And you made it so badly because you have never in your life read a book for love, and so you do not know what the loving eye sees, that it contradicts your own suit and convicts you out of your own hand. Mr. Soames has seen it, your own mother's man of business, and would not stake his neck on your case after. The Dowager Duchess of Harrogate has seen it, and has been kind enough to mention to me that the bench at Chancery contains 2 men who dined at her table last winter, and would be most interested to learn how Mr. Crispin Vane came to lay a forged instrument before the court." She closed the ledger. The sound of it was very final in the quiet room. "Here are the terms, cousin. They are not generous, because you have not earned generosity, but they are better than the alternative, and I am my father's daughter, and I will give you the same cold mercy he would have given. You will sign, here, now, before my husband and before Mr. Pell, who is waiting in the next room, with the register he is still ashamed of, a full and absolute renunciation of any claim, guardianship, codicil, or interest in Vane Court or in my person, in perpetuity. You will leave Kent, and in exchange, I will put this page in the fire instead of in the post to London, and you will keep your name, which is, God help us both, also my father's name, and the only reason I am troubling to save it." Crispin Vane looked at the closed ledger, and at his cousin, and at the Duke of Harrogate beside her, who had not said one word, who only sat with his scarred hand quiet on the table, and his hard, watchful eyes on the man who had tried to break his wife, and whose silence was somehow more total than any threat. And the long patience of 30 years went out of his handsome face all at once, and left it merely tired, and merely beaten, and merely cruel, with nowhere left to put the cruelty. "You were always," he said, low, "your father's clerk. Even he never thought you anything more." "I know," said Rosalind Vane, and discovered with some surprise that the old wound the words were meant to open had healed over in a single summer while she was not attending to it. "It is the great mistake of my family, cousin, that none of you ever troubled to learn the difference between a clerk and the person who actually understands the books. My father loved me as a clerk. You feared me as one. And I have just kept the whole of Vane Court out of your hands with a single page, in an afternoon, for love, which is a thing no clerk has ever done, and which neither of you ever once imagined I might be." She pushed the deed of renunciation across the table, and laid the pen upon it, exactly as Mr. Pell had laid the pen before the Duke on the night this began. "Sign your honest name, Crispin. It is the only useful thing left for it to do." He signed, and the Duke of Harrogate rose then, at last, and crossed to the door, and opened it, and stood holding it, the great breadth of him filling the frame, the way he had filled the taproom door and the vestry door. Only now he was not hiding in any borrowed coat. Now he was entirely and unmistakably himself. And Crispin Vane went out under his silent regard, and out of the house and out of Kent. And the dust of his hired gig was the last of 3 dusts to settle on Sir Henry Vane's Lime Avenue, and no carriage that came after it, in all the long years that followed, ever again came to that house to take anything away. They burned the forged page that evening, the 2 of them, in the estate office grate, though it was high summer and there had been no fire laid. The Duke built one with his own hands out of kindling and a single split log, and Rosalind fed the false codicil into it, and they watched her cousin's 3 days' patient cruelty curl and blacken, and go up the chimney of the house it had been made to steal, and then go out. "Your aunt," Rosalind said, watching the last of it.
The Dowager. She knew. About Soames declining. About the bench at Chancery. She has been working on our side this whole 11 days, and never said a word to me directly.
She would not, said the Duke. It is the family failing. We do the warmest things in the coldest possible manner, and announce none of them, and then wonder why no one knows we are not made of stone. He stirred the small fire with the toe of his boot. She sent something, this morning. I have been waiting for the right hour to give it to you, and I think the hour is now, with your cousin's forgery going up the chimney. From his coat, he took a small flat packet wrapped in silk, and put it into her ink-stained hands, and she unwrapped it. And inside was a miniature. Not a daguerreotype. The year was far too early for any such thing. A true painted miniature on ivory, old and fine, in a worn gold frame, of a laughing, dark-haired boy of perhaps 24 in hunting pink, with the Harrogate jaw and the Harrogate eyes and, unmistakably, the almost smile, caught by some long-dead painter exactly at the moment before it arrived. My brother, said the Duke, very low. She has kept it on her own writing table for 11 years, and let no hand but hers touch it. There was a note. 3 words. You will know what to do with this. Which is my aunt's entire vocabulary of love, all of it. The whole estate of her heart in 5 syllables. He looked at the small painted face of the boy who should have been Duke, and his hand went, as it always did, to his ring, and then stopped, and came instead to rest over Rosalind's hand, where it held his brother's likeness. I think she means that you are to put it somewhere in this house. Somewhere it will be seen and loved and counted, by someone who counts everything. I think, Rosalind, that my aunt has decided you are the keeper of the family's account now. It is the largest thing she has ever given anyone. She gave it to the inn-yard duchess. Do better than she did, she told you. I believe she means to help. And Rosalind Vane, Duchess of Harrogate, who had married a stranger by dawn to keep her father's house, and had kept, instead, it turned out, a great deal more than a house, stood in the warm summer dark with her dead father's ledgers behind her, and her living husband's hand over hers, and his lost brother's laughing face on her palm. And she understood that she had, after all, overbought at market, exactly as her father had always said she would, and that it was the single best bargain of her life, and that not one figure in it had come right by arithmetic, and that this, in the end, was the whole and only point. I shall put him over the office mantel, she said when she could, where I keep the books, so that he is in the warmest room in the house, and the most used, and never once in great state. I think he would have liked that, your brother. I think a man who went over a fence laughing would rather be in the room where the work is done than the room where the company sits. Yes, said the Duke of Harrogate, and his voice went rough at the edge, the way it had gone rough on I Will in a cold vestry a lifetime and a month ago. Yes, he would have liked you, Rosalind. He liked anyone who was entirely themselves. There were never very many of you. The Gazette did, in the end, carry an announcement of the Duke of Harrogate's marriage, some weeks late, in the small, dignified print of a thing the family considered settled beyond the need for haste. And Lady Sophia Carlo, who had wanted the coronet since she was 16, accepted within the 12-month a perfectly suitable marquis who suited her perfectly, and was, by all accounts, perfectly content, which was exactly as much as she had ever asked of anyone. And Mr. Crispin Vane was heard of in Bristol, and then in Lisbon, and then no more. And his honest name, kept for him by the cousin he had wronged, went quietly out of the county the way such names do, unmourned and unforged. And at Vane Court, where the lime avenue Sir Henry had planted grew its long green summers one after another, the estate office became, against every expectation of architecture and rank, the most used room in the house. Because the Duke of Harrogate, who had been wanted by everyone and known by no one, discovered in himself a great and unducal appetite for sitting across a ledger-strewn table from his wife in the gold end of the afternoon, losing at chess, being read like an open book, and being, for the first time in 11 years, entirely and unmistakably himself, in front of someone who counted every figure of him and found, summing it, that the account came out exactly right. It was an evening near the end of that first long summer. The hay in, the limes heavy, a far warm thunder going round to the east as it had gone round on the night of the vestry, and never once that whole season broken. When Rosalind looked up from the great ledger she was closing for the day and found her husband watching her across the board with the almost smile arrived and stayed, no longer almost anything. "Do you know," he said, "that you have never once told me what to call you? You gave me a list that first night. Your widow, your nothing, your 100-pound bargain, whatever was convenient. I have been working through it for a year and finding none of them convenient at all." She set down her pen in the worn old place where her finger had sat since she was 9. Above the mantel, the laughing boy in hunting pink kept his ivory watch over the warmest room in the house. Outside the open window, the summer dark came down soft over the Duke of Harrogate's quiet fields, and her father's, and hers. "You signed Duke in the register," she said, "and made me a duchess I never asked to be. I think, Your Grace, that you had better call me your wife, since that is the one figure in this whole account that I entered freely, and checked 3 times, and have never once wished to rule out." "My wife," said the Duke of Harrogate, trying it, the rough edge coming into his voice, the hand coming to rest not on his ring, but over hers. "Yes, that one's true. I'll have it carved over the office door." "You will do no such thing. It is a working room." "Then I shall only," he said, "have it carved over you." And he leaned across her father's chessboard in the last of the summer light and kissed his wife, who had come to an inn looking for a nobody and gone home with the one man in England who had wanted, of all the things she had to offer, only the smallest one: her hand, her name, her honest signature, and had thereby, without either of them once intending it, balanced the only book that ever truly mattered in the only currency that ever truly counted, and ruled, at the bottom of the last full page, a single firm line, under a total that would not, for the rest of their 2 long lives, ever again come out wrong.